Good morning, everybody. I'm Audra Mitchell, your host for today's Level Up Wednesday webinars. For our webinar Wednesday regulars, we say welcome back. For anyone joining us for the first time, we say welcome. So we're really excited about our session today. And I guess I say that practically every week and every time we have one, because I'm always excited by our presenters. So as we all continue adjusting and adapting to our new normal, today we will be bringing you another global perspective regarding the world now, which our presenter will be exploring from both an individual and business point of view. Before I introduce our presenter, just want to share some quick reminders, and I know our regulars will be familiar with this, but again, for anybody joining us for the first time, and this has to do with our flow. So upon completion of the presentation, we will have our Q&A segment, right? So this will occur at the end of the presentation. Any questions or comments you have should be posted in the chat box. If someone posts a question that you wanted to ask, we want to encourage you to click the thumbs up icon by that question. So this will help us in our moderating section to get through as many questions as possible, as we know it's a limited time frame. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenter today. I am extremely excited and honored to introduce our presenter, whom I have known for a long time, since school days, and for whom I have huge respect, Ms. Renee Cummings. There's so much that I can say about Renee. She is sought after globally by individuals and organizations alike for her insights and perspectives on global matters. She is the CEO and founder of Urban AI LLC. Renee is a renowned criminologist, an AI strategist, an ethicist, and urban technologist. She is passionate about using AI to design real-time resilient solutions to urban challenges, as well as committed to helping companies navigate the AI landscape and developing future AI leaders. She presents us today the topic, the world now. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ms. Renee Cummings.
Good morning. Thank you, Audra, for that fantastic introduction. It is certainly an honor and a pleasure to be with you. One of the things that you didn't say is that I love having conversations. So I'm hoping that at the end of this conversation, we can all come to some kind of consensus on how we exist in this new normal and how we move forward. So I am a criminologist, that is my substantive role, but I'm also an AI ethicist, and AI is artificial intelligence. So most recently, I would say within the last year and a half, I've been existing at the intersection of artificial intelligence and criminal justice. And as we see what's happening in the world right now, we would see the importance of those two professions. So let's begin. The world now. It will never be the same, and neither can you. Very important for us to think about. So as we move through the presentation, let me start here. On the cusp of colossal change, this is where we are. The world now. So what are we seeing? COVID-19, we have experienced that for the last 4 months. And the one thing that we are certain about when it comes to COVID is that the experts are uncertain. We don't know. We just don't know how this thing is going to go. Many of the experts are saying that we have not even fully entered the first wave as yet, and then we're expecting several waves. And what are we seeing as well? What I call the new arms race. and that is a race for a vaccine. And what the experts and the scholars and the literature is saying is that we may not see a vaccine for about 24 months. So it's about 2 years that we may have to exist in a state of uncertainty. We know it's a public health crisis because we've had to take and adhere to new measures, things that we weren't expecting in this lifetime. And once it's a public health issue, it becomes a public safety issue. And what we're also seeing, and now that our borders are closed and many nations across the world have their borders closed as well, what we are seeing is that public health can also be a national security issue. And for criminologists and someone who exists at that intersection of criminology and artificial intelligence, what we are also seeing is a systems integration between public health and security. And that has the world a bit scared because the same technology that's being used to trace and monitor and isolate individuals with COVID-19 is the same technology that's being used by security. So what we're seeing is heavy surveillance technologies like facial recognition, again, very contentious and very controversial. And we're seeing much of the strategies for public health are also strategies that are being executed by law enforcement. So if you've been following the news, you would see in South Korea, in China, in Israel, these countries are using their security forces to execute public health strategies. So different things are happening in the world that you've got to be thinking about. We know it's a financial crisis, and I think that is the one that has hit most of us hard and pretty much hit us at home. But we're also seeing a mental health crisis that's spiraling the financial crisis, and many of the scholars, many of the experts, many of the psychologists and psychiatrists, social workers and mental health practitioners are saying we've got to pay particular attention to that mental health crisis as well. We are living with a pandemic. And the scary part for epidemiologists and individuals who operate in that public health arena is that we have never updated our pandemic playbook in the last 100 years. And right now we are preparing for more because we don't know how many strains of the COVID-19 we are possibly going to see before the 24 months when we are promised this vaccine. We are also seeing a world in conflict. We're seeing civil arrests around the world because of racism, because of the murder of George Floyd, which has really taken on a really domino effect across the world. And what we're calling that would be a double pandemic, public health and racism, which many people are saying is also a public health concern. That is the world now. It is a world of uncertainty. It is a world that is changing constantly, and it is in a world in which we have now got to exist. Life post-lockdown. So what are we going to see? More contactless interfaces and interactions. We're also going to see a strengthening worldwide of the digital infrastructure, because that is the infrastructure that has been keeping us together during this pandemic. What else are we going to see? Of course, more monitoring using big data. We're going to see artificial intelligence enabling development at all levels. We are already seeing it in healthcare. Much of the solutions that are being proffered, that are being designed to treat with this pandemic are AI inspired. We're seeing it in finance, more and more people having to use online platforms. We are seeing it in every area, criminal justice, public health. We are just seeing AI moving in as quickly as it can. And really, many people not expecting that AI would have been, the go-to so soon. Telemedicine, telelearning, more online shopping, increased reliance on robots. Robotics is huge right now, particularly, yes, on the side of defense. We are seeing robots now being designed to do many things when it comes to national security, but we're also seeing it in a very strange place, which is healthcare. And because of the pandemic and because of the need to sanitize spaces, we are seeing robots already in hospitals internationally doing sanitization, taking medication to individuals with COVID-19 to intercept transmission. We're seeing robots also on AI in the triage, where we're now seeing AI in particular being used to ration healthcare, something that is very contentious. Definitely, we're seeing more and more digital events. Of course, this is one that we're having right here, and I know you've had several in the past, and we'll have several more. And definitely, we're going to see the rise of esports without fans. So this is our life post-lockdown. What are we doing now? For many of us, we are returning to the unknown. And what we are saying from the perspective of psychology, I'm also a criminal psychologist, is that much of what people are doing now is what a particular cohort or a particular demographic in our population have had to do for many years, and that would be individuals who were coming out of the prison system. In the prison system, we would have to teach them re-entry skills, how to re-socialize, and we are getting a sense of that now because we are now using re-entry skills. We're entering the workplace, right? We are re-entering, and what are requiring? We are requiring that space is healthy, and it's safe. So it's got to be sanitized. We've got to spray it down with Lysol. That's what we're expecting if we are in that physical space. We're also re-entering relationships because of COVID-19. We have got to change. We have had to change the ways in which we relate to each other. Number one, hygiene. You know, it's really scary. And you've been reading stories of people saying they've gone to a public place and someone has sneezed or someone has coughed, and then just about everyone sort of runs for cover, right? Like bunker style, because it's a different space in which we're entering. And now we are talking about public health. Many of the individuals who we have worked with, who we have been separated from for the last 3 or 4 months, have had to deal with many things that we may not be privy to, that we may not be aware of. So there are public health concerns, there are mental health concerns that we've got to take into consideration. So it calls for a new level of sophistication when it comes to re-socialization. The other question that we've been talking about a lot is the re-entry speed. Not everyone is going to make that adjustment in the right time or in real time. So from a perspective of leadership or of leading teams, we have got to manage the transition of individuals, our team members, our employees who are coming back into the workspace. So employee health and employee wellness are now priority areas for companies internationally. And employee health and wellness is no longer a free pass to the gym or maybe a coupon to do a spa treatment. It's really thinking about your employees' health, thinking about their mental hygiene, and thinking about their wellness in real terms. The other kind of thinking that you're forced to do now is called thinking outside the box. Well, the bad news is, or the good news is, depending on how you look at it, there is no box. COVID-19 shattered that box a long time ago. The box has been destroyed. So across the world, individuals and organizations and cities and countries are saying this is an opportunity to build something new. We've got to replace the box. Will it ever look like a box again? Who knows? It's up to you. It's up to you. Critical thinking. Nothing gets more critical than that. You've got to apply critical thinking to what you are doing. You've got to apply creative thinking because now it is about innovation. And divergent thinking is also very important. You've got to be innovative. And this is what we are seeing right now. So I work in tech. And I work with some of the top innovators in the world. Although I work on the side of ethics, ethics is critical at every stage of the life cycle to ensure the quality products that we are developing have got to be quality, to ensure there's diversity, equity, and inclusion at every stage of the life cycle. So divergent thinking is critical. And when you combine critical, creative, and divergent, you get an imagination that can create anything. The one thing that you don't want in this new reality is groupthink. That's gone. There is no place for that anymore. And that's one of the good things about this pandemic. It has removed some of the traditions that we no longer need. you've got to be thinking again about how do we do things? How do we make things real time? How do we ensure our responses are innovative? And I think what we're seeing right now, because of COVID-19, we're seeing the big tech companies and what they are doing. We've seen Facebook and Twitter say to their employees that you don't ever have to come back to work if you don't want to. You can stay home pretty much forever, right? We're seeing that. But we're also seeing a change in the world order, because what we are seeing are the big tech companies and technoscience really dictating the pace as we move forward. So you would appreciate that digital technology is huge. Big data has become even bigger. Predictive analytics is where it is at. And that's the realm in which I work as a criminologist specializing in AI. Predictive analytics is what we do when it comes to predictive policing or precision policing, or how we look at certain demographics, things like geospatial technology, geofencing. These are all technoscience, and you have got to think within that context. Techno-solutionism. Now, that's a pretty new term, and it may be for some of you, but that is what we speak about in technology, where many of the solutions are tech-driven. But because something is tech-driven does not often or every time make it better. So what we are saying is, although we know that the world is moving towards technology, that technology must have a human-centered approach. So you must apply a moral imagination, and that is where ethics is situated, in the moral imagination, to ensure that our solutions, as technocentric and as innovative as they are, they must also be human-centered. Data is power, and I couldn't say that more and more and more. Data is power. The world is now trading in data. It is about innovation and it is about transformation. And with data, we can do that. So you have got to ensure, from a team perspective, from an organizational perspective, that you are looking at the data and how is your data being collected. Very, very important. The other thing about AI is, although it is stretching the imagination, it is also widening the digital divide. So in AI, we talk about the global north and we talk about the global south. And we talk about that in economics, in sociology, in politics. And what we're seeing, the global south, countries like the Caribbean and Latin America, what we are seeing in these countries is that we have got to play a lot of catch up, because we are just not there yet when it comes to technology. And because we are not data-driven as a society, we are getting left behind as we still try to figure out the meaning of diversification. So remember that the box is no longer there. It's now up to you to create whatever that shape is going to be, and you have got to decide that. How do you manage a hybrid environment? That's a question that I got asked, particularly from your team. How do you do that? Well, the fact that you're sitting in your office, or you're sitting at home, or you're sitting in your car, or you're sitting on your porch, wherever you are sitting, you have realized that office culture has changed, and it's not going to go back to what it was. We have got to make, and we have had to make, adjustments. And to transition, you have got to adjust. So you have got to learn how to be flexible, because with flexibility and agility, you will be able to navigate the physical and the virtual. It is very important. You've got to keep your teams engaged, because when you think about it, you are doing a presentation like I am, and I'm accustomed to being in a room with hundreds, and now I'm just sitting at a computer having a conversation with myself. There is no engagement, so I don't know if you guys are enjoying this, if you're laughing, if you're smiling, or if you've just had enough, but I'm hoping that you're still there with me, right? So we've got to keep our teams engaged. We've got to keep people motivated and inspired in a virtual space. And that takes a lot of learning. That's a whole new responsibility. One of the things that you've got to do, you've got to up it when it comes to your communication skills. You've got to look at your interpersonal style, particularly in a virtual space where lots is lost in translation. If you've ever tried to have a conversation using WhatsApp or using any kind of technology where you can converse, you would know that sometimes you say something even in an email and someone gets the wrong impression. And then you've got to jump in there and do damage control, or sometimes you may end a relationship and realize that a comma was missing and it was a different sentence, right? Crisis management. We've had to deal with crisis management because of COVID-19. Some companies that did not have effective crisis management strategies were companies that are probably struggling right now. So crisis management is critical. Business continuity, contingency planning. You've got to keep those things on top of the agenda at every stage of the game. Coaching and mentoring in a virtual space is one that you've got to think about. And you've also got to think about that critically, because what you're going to realize is that you're going to need those skills, right? The communication skills, the virtual interpersonal skills, that ability to be agile and to be flexible and to adjust. You're going to need that to do the coaching and the mentoring and to lead from a virtual space. You've got to do that while remaining emotionally stable. And that's a big one. Self-care. Self-care is critical to everything that we do. If you don't take care of you, how are you going to be able to take care of anyone else? I want you to think about that. Managing remote work. Well, we know this. The future of work is no longer what happens in the office. That's a wrap. That doesn't happen anymore. Remote work is no longer a trend. Remember when it was trendy and people were having that conversations and people wanted to speak to their bosses about, working from home one day. Well, hey, everybody's been working from home pretty much for the last 3 to 4 months, right? So you have got to embrace new workplace dynamics. It is critical. The workplace, you've got to reshape it, and you've got to create that shape that works and that shape that combines and collaborates virtual and physical. So I think we're all in a process of reevaluating the approaches to establish new rules and new protocols, because you're traversing two areas. How do you do that, and how do you do that well? Futurist thinking is critical. You have got to be forward thinking. You must be forward thinking. You have got to combine that creative thinking, that divergent thinking, that critical thinking. And that has got to give you a game plan or create a blueprint when nobody's thinking the old way. Nobody's thinking the old way. It's about innovation. It's about new and emerging technologies. It's about augmented intelligence. So you've got to bring a futurist perspective to the table. You've got to listen, and a lot of us don't like to listen. You've got to listen now, and you've got to anticipate the needs of your team, teams that are working in the office and teams that are working remotely. And it's about collaborative and sustainable working environments. How do you do that? The thing is, none of us know how to do that because we are all returning to this space at the same time. But you've got to think about it, and you've got to have the conversations that are going to help you to be able to negotiate and navigate this space as we move out of the tunnel. Another big question is, how do we manage productivity and distractions at the same time? Well, how do you do that? We can't shy away from having difficult conversations, and it's conversations that we must have openly and we must have honestly about what's going on. What are your issues at home? What are your challenges? What are the things that may impact you at home? What are your challenges getting to work? How do you feel about coming to work? How do you feel about being in a space? How do you feel about being next to an employee? So we have got to have some conversations with each other to decide what is best. What is best? We just can't try to fit back into the old mold because we're going to have a lot of discomfort and a lot of dis-ease. You've got to future-proof the infrastructure. We're seeing that happening internationally. Companies are allowing employees to buy furniture to set up home offices because some people may have been operating on the dining room table or on their beds or sitting in front of the TV. We don't want people to get any sort of extra sort of physical challenges. And about the workspace, because what we're seeing across the world are a lot of empty offices. And we have got to decide what's happening in that. So it's really about future-proofing the infrastructure, something we should have done probably 100 years ago when we had our last pandemic. A lot of investing in tech, A lot of individuals just naturally are buying more things. They are buying more equipment to help with their webinars. A lot of people are just buying things to make them look more professional, just online. You're seeing that companies are really upgrading their tech as well. So very important, because that lack of tech could definitely undermine business and create some additional gaps in business that you really don't want to deal with at this time. It's about setting boundaries, and new boundaries have got to be set, because while we're at home, we appreciate that we are at home and there are many things happening in the household. But if you're having a meeting, you can't expect your team to be party to all the fun things that are happening in your house, right? So we've got to think about that. Time management. We thought that working at home would have been more time for us, but now we're realizing that we have so many Zoom calls and so many web meetings that we're feeling overwhelmed. I mean, I have about 10 this month, and in so many different fields that I too had to do some extra time schedules last night. Intellectual agility, and this one is really important. You've got to be agile intellectually, because this reality that we are in now is really calling for you to be able to multitask at a very different level if you want to stay relevant. So it's really critical for you to think about that. Think about how the intellect is working for you. Think about ways to ensure that you're agile, that you're able to think in a very flexible way, that you're multidisciplinary, because these are the skill sets that are going to help us moving forward. Your mind. If you need to create an oasis, your mind is that oasis. And you have got to think about also having a space where you can retreat to. And that space is a mental space. Leadership in a digital age. So if you are leading any team anywhere in the world right now, you have got to be data driven. You just have to. There is no option. Your decisions have got to be informed. And informed decision-making means they are evidence-based, means they are empirical. So as an AI ethicist, I work within the realm of algorithms. That's what I do. As a criminologist, I interrogate suspects. As an AI ethicist, I interrogate algorithms. So that's what I do. So algorithmic decision-making systems are the systems that are now finding their way into the C-suite, into courtrooms, into any space. What we are getting are these tools that we put data into, and they give us decisions. Some of those decisions, what we call risk scores, we are seeing them in the criminal justice system internationally, and that's where I work, and that's where I interrogate them, because many of them are biased and many of them are discrimination, because we know if the data is dirty, what the outcome is going to be. So these algorithmic decision-making systems, we're seeing them in insurance industries, we're seeing them in finance, we're seeing them in just about everything, HR, hiring practices. And now, particularly because of COVID, we're going to be seeing more algorithmic decision-making systems being used to do online and video interviews. Digital intelligence. You've got to understand the digital world. Emotional intelligence. Diverse intelligences, that understanding that people learn at different speeds, that people have all types of intelligences. You have people who are autistic, you have people with disabilities who are as brilliant as ever, and we've got to ensure that we include that diversity in intelligence. And then there's augmented intelligence. Augmented intelligence is that ability to learn how to work with machines. And you're going to find more and more in your workspace that you will be doing more things with AI, more things with algorithms, more things with anything that is computer or digitally driven. And collective intelligence is that combination of that diverse intelligences. Your teams are in there with you, technology is in there with you, and you are using everything to come up with the right decision. The right attitude. Well, attitude, is something that we have got to figure out on our own. And we've always got to ask ourselves some really difficult questions about our attitudes at different times, because that's our fuel, right? That's our fuel for me. It's about growth. It's about committed partnerships. Very, very important, because what we've had to do in the last 3 to 4 months is grow. We have had to grow. And if you didn't grow, you've got to ask yourself why, because, it was definitely a challenging period for all of us. Committed partnerships. We are going to be seeing much more collaborations moving forward. And I spoke about this before. You have got to create the right structures and the right boundaries, because if you don't take care of yourself, you are going to drain yourself. And if you drain yourself, it means you have no energy to do anything, to give any more of yourself. It is about responsibilities. And I think more and more we're seeing that we have been taking on an extraordinary amount of responsibilities right now. And you've got to think about that. I spoke about this: intellectual agility, flexibility, critical, and continuous adjustment of schedules. The minute you think your schedule is in place now, something else happens. And the minute that people think now we can do this virtual thing and we can do this really quickly, everyone wants to have a virtual meeting. So you have got to really think about that, but you've also got to appreciate the time that we are in, and you've got to be able to make those adjustments really seamlessly, understanding. And as I would say, the struggle is real for many people. There are many individuals among us who work with us who have had a really tough time because of COVID-19. And you have got to have understanding, empathy, emotional intelligence, very critical. The psychological mindset. I think for all of us, and even for myself as a professional, I have had to do a psychological audit. And as a criminal psychologist, that's something that I do with clients, right? But I have to do it myself. And it's called an emotional stock taking, because we went through a lot of emotions because of COVID-19, and we're still going through those emotions. We've got to look at our assets and we've got to look at our deficits. And where there are deficits, we've got to find ways to bolster that, to fortify that. Post-traumatic stress disorder and other stressors. I've been seeing a lot of this in my own work because of COVID-19, because of the public health crisis, because of the financial crisis, because of the mental health crisis. We're seeing that families are under a lot of stress. What we're also seeing is a lot of trauma, because there have been many families who have lost loved ones to COVID-19 who were unable to attend their funerals or who were unable to grieve. And there are lots of people walking around right now with a lot of pain, with a lot of hurt, not knowing for many people how their next meal is going to come. Many people are suicidal. I could not tell you how many emails and how many messages I get in social media from people who are saying to me that they want to give up. And it really is difficult. Anxiety. This virus has created an extraordinary amount of anxiety because it's, the enemy that you can't see. And that's what it is. And really it has created a lot of fear. Fear of exposure. There's some people who are very anxious about that. Well, we saw in the early stages, the level of anxiety purchasing, people buying, things that they probably could not use in this lifetime. So we're seeing anxiety. We're seeing anxiety because of that fear of exposure. Forced isolation. There are many people who suffer or who struggle with things like attention deficit or anxiety disorders or antisocial disorders, who it's really difficult for them to stay home. And now that we are transitioning back out into space, there are many people who may take unnecessary risks because they feel that they're free. They felt that they were imprisoned and now we are free. So we are seeing, we will be seeing a lot of behavior, and a lot of behavior that may be risky, and a lot of behavior that is risky because it comes from a space of psychological strain. And listen to me, a loss of finances, any of us, or all of us could know that when families are impacted by finances, it creates stress. The loss of finance has been linked to things like child abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence. These things create real problems in the household. So people are coming back into a space that they may not be ready for. The transition is difficult, and you may have a spouse or a partner or a sibling or a child, an adult child who was contributing to the household. And while you may have your job, that person may no longer have a job. So at home, we are having more and more questions or more and more challenges that we still have to deal with, right? What I try to say is find meaning. Find meaning and creativity in adversity. It's easier said than done, but it can be done. It can be done. It's also about our human capacity of resilience. We are very resilient human beings. Resilience is the psychology of bouncing back. We can do that, but it takes a good look at that emotional stock taking, those assets and those deficits, right? That psychological audit. So the psychological mindset is critical. And it's not because I'm a psychologist that I'm saying that, but because I'm a mother, right? Because I'm there. I'm trying to do all the things that you're doing. So I'm not talking from a place that I don't know. I'm talking from a place in which I exist. So what I'm saying to you, you've got to take care of your mind. You've got to ensure that you are mentally healthy. It is critical. And you've got to ensure that if you need help, you access through your employee assistance program or through family members or through your faith-based institutions and organizations, through your church, whoever it is. If you need to talk to somebody, I'm saying to you, talk. Don't let that build up in you. Don't let that build up in you. And there are lots of people. And if you could even talk to someone else, that is also important, because as I said to you, it's about emotional intelligence. It's about empathy. It's about being kind to ourselves and being kind to others. So that psychological mindset is really critical. Digital identity is just something that I want to touch upon. And what we're going to see is that, and what you probably know is that we all have a digital twin. And the big question would be, what does your digital twin look like? And I think if you are pretty savvy with any sort of search engine optimization tools, you may want to run a check and see what your digital identity looks like. But what we're seeing when it comes to digital identity, and you would appreciate that more and more because of this pandemic, we will be using the digital space to do as many transactions as possible. You would know now, let's say the US, particularly in New York, which was so hard hit by the pandemic, and which is my home, that we started to do weddings virtually, right? So the process of getting married during that time became much easier because people were just getting married legally on Zoom. So there are going to be more risks as we negotiate ourselves out of this pandemic space and into that new reality. With risk comes responsibility. So from an organizational level, from an individual level, you've got to pay particular attention to things like identity theft, privacy, security, big things. Where the digital space provides extraordinary promise, there is a lot of peril and a lot of danger there, because what we are seeing is that privacy is no longer private. And that's a big one. Security is another area which we're seeing more and more malicious actors. We are seeing things like deep fakes, and deep fakes are those videos that look like it's the real person, but it's really not the real person, and it's not the real person saying things that could become very, very contentious. And disinformation, and we've been seeing the disinformation campaign. Many of us get involved in disinformation when we click and we share things that are not true, that we have not checked and tested. Usually if I see something or someone sends me something, whatever it is, I just always Google it. I always look to ensure it comes from 3 top news sources. I look for one US, I look for one UK, and another international to ensure what I'm saying or what I'm sharing is important. You've got to do that. Sometimes people are sharing videos, and the videos are from 10 and 5 years ago. People are sharing news stories that are old news stories with similar headlines. You want to think about that. So what we're seeing are these malicious actors, and we're seeing more and more and more of them. And you've got to be really, really careful in the way you do business as an individual and the ways in which you do business as an organization. Surveillance. So we're seeing lots and lots of surveillance, only because surveillance technology is now being used as a public health strategy when it comes to contact tracing and monitoring and isolation and self-quarantine. We will see in the Asian countries, they're already using geofacing technology on your cell phones to ensure that once you're in quarantine, you do not leave quarantine. This technology is very controversial. It has been seen to be very discriminatory and very biased because the very data sets that they are built on are not diverse data sets. So within the last 48 hours, you would see that IBM has decided it is no longer moving forward with developing facial recognition technology because it is racist and it is about digital profiling and it profiles Black and brown people, and they believe that they don't want to participate in over surveilling minority communities anymore. And IBM CEO said that's it. We're not moving forward with this technology because we're committed to racial justice in America. Corporate surveillance, and that's the big one. And that's the scary one because more and more companies are now starting to monitor what their employees are doing at home. And how are they doing that? Keyboard tracking, computer technology that takes a random shot of your screen to see what you're looking at. So corporate surveillance is a big one, and many companies want to measure productivity while employees are working remotely. And again, it is something that may have some ethical concerns. Data collection, very, very big. How is your data being collected? You want to know that from a personal level, and if you're doing it from an organizational level, you've got to ensure that you're taking an ethical approach to data collection. Who's collecting the data? How is it going to be stored? How is it going to be disposed? Do I have the right to be forgotten? These are big questions and big concerns that are happening internationally, and that is the space in which I work as an AI ethicist. So digital identity is something that you want to pay attention to. Very, very important. The other thing is artificial intelligence. And I wish I could have spent the entire day with you having a session on AI because this is my love, but we can't do that. So there's narrow AI, and narrow AI is what we've been using right now and what has been developing more and more. So if you use Amazon, you've been using AI. If you use Netflix, you've been using AI. If you use Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, you have been using AI. AI built on algorithms, you've seen it. You've seen that you may be looking for something online, looking for a particular product, and then you go onto your Instagram page or you go onto your Facebook page, and then all of a sudden you're flooded with all of these ads. Those are algorithms working in the back there. General AI is the AI we see in movies, right? That's the AI that is actually human, and that's not going to happen anytime soon, but that's the one that most people fear. So the statistics I'm going to give you are now so outdated, but I'm giving it to you because this is pre-COVID-19 stats. So what it said then is that by 2030, AI would add 15.7 trillion to the global GDP, 6.6 trillion from increased productivity, 9.1 trillion from consumption effects. Now, given what happened with this pandemic, the world wasn't expecting that. AI wasn't expecting that. The industry wasn't expecting that it would be the go-to now for solutions. So we can pretty much, say to ourselves that those figures are going to be extraordinary because we're seeing AI being used to, because of its pervasiveness, because of its speed, and because of its ability to even track a pandemic at scale, we're seeing it being used in everything, as I say to you, from dealing with this pandemic, being part of the design process for the vaccine. It is playing a major role there in every aspect of healthcare, every aspect of policing and law enforcement, national security and defense, marketing, supply chain, education. Everything that we do is going to be powered by law. AI law is now the future. It's called future law, right? You have got to think about that. You have got to think about that. So what AI is forcing us to do, because many people anticipate a loss of jobs, and there are going to be some losses. It may not be extraordinary, and it may not be you if you take the opportunity to retrain yourself and to reskill. And I've had to do that. Practicing as a criminologist for many years, my substantive work is policing, and I specialize in homicide, the homicide investigation, homicide reduction, gun and gang violence prevention. That's where I work. And I had to reskill because I said to myself, how do I continue being a criminologist in the next 10 years? And I had to turn myself into an AI criminologist really quickly. So you've got to reskill and you've got to upskill. And you've got to do that if you want to stay relevant, if you want to be real time. If you don't want to be real time and you don't want to be relevant, it means that you want to be redundant. And I don't think anybody wants to be redundant. So what I'm saying to you is that you've got some serious decisions to make as an individual and as an organization. So this is the era of disruption. And we were talking disruption pre-COVID. So this is like disruption on steroids now that we are in this space. And I want you to think about that really, really critically. And the other thing about artificial intelligence is that there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of frustration and there's a lot of anxiety and negativity and suspicion around it. And those things are good because those are the emotions that make us ask those critical questions. And those are the emotions that make us ensure with an organization is going to design, develop, and deploy an AI strategy, that it is an inclusive strategy and that is an ethical strategy. So those are the things that you need when you're having those open and honest conversations to discuss openly without fear. But AI is the ultimate game changer, and it is the ultimate game changer in every industry. Just Google it right now as we're talking, and you would see the articles are not stopping. But there is also something called the socio-techno impact. And that's where we see this digital divide. That's where we're seeing now with education. Not all kids have laptops at home. Not all of them have internet. Not all of them have the things that they need to succeed. So even after we move past this pandemic, when we do the research on how this pandemic impacted the educational outcomes of children, we may see some things that we may not have expected, because there are some people who are going to advance and there are some people who are going to be struggling. So when it comes to AI, an ethical approach to AI is critical, because this technology and the leveraging of new digital technologies to drive large-scale transformation and competitiveness is as real as it's going to get. AI is also being used to confront and reinvent outdated systems, processes, behaviors, and mindset. You can't have that old mind as we move into that new normal. Leaders will have to manage change and foster a culture of learning and growth. Change management, crisis management are critical moving forward. What is AI going to require? Well, it's going to require some visionary leadership. Individuals who have the DQ, the digital intelligence, right? The IQ, the intelligence, the EQ, the emotional intelligence. It's going to be there. AI is going to be there, and you are going to have to find a way to just use that technology to build, to innovate, but of course you're doing all of this within the realm of a human-centric approach. So post-COVID-19, I don't know when that post is going to be, but in this world now, you have got to appreciate that more and more, because we are using technology to design systems, that you have got to pay particular attention to diversity, equity, inclusion, and fairness. And we're seeing the world struggling with that right now, particularly in the context of the United States, particularly how the death of George Floyd at the hands of a police officer is now making us look critically at police reform and whether or not there is equity in justice in the United States. It's a big question that they have got to answer. I'm also a part of that question as a criminologist who works in that space and who works in police reform. It really is a huge question that must come up with some sort of answers in real time. Fairness. when it comes to artificial intelligence, because we're using data and because much of the data is historic data, and historic data may not be the cleanest data, it takes a lot of digital scrubbing to get it where it needs to be, we have got to be data vigilant. And that's something that I speak a lot about, data vigilance and data consciousness, to ensure that the technologies that we are using, new and emerging technologies, are accountable, that they are transparent, that they are explainable, and they are responsible. Because some of the challenges we are seeing now, and many of this may be new to you, and it's unfortunate, and I would love if you could just read up on it. What we are seeing from the realm of AI ethics is many of these algorithmic decision-making systems, because they are designed by third-party vendors for different governments and organizations and public institutions, there's this big question about whether or not we can have access to the black box. And the black box is, the algorithmic design that has been used, because what they say, that's a trade secret. That's a proprietary right. We are not able to see that. But what we're seeing in the courts, particularly now in the US, is that many of these algorithmic decision-making systems, much of AI, is really infringing on people's rights, that AI has also the ability to do great things, but to do some tough things and some negative things, like it could erode human rights, it could undermine democratic rights. So what we're seeing is that there are some things that still need to be worked out, because due process and duty of care and civil rights and human rights are now being compromised by technology. And if you work in the realm of technology, you know that technology is always a few years ahead of the law, which gives tech companies a great big space to, or a great big loop to keep jumping through, because the rest of the world is just not there yet. So as you design, as you develop, as you deploy AI systems, if you're in that position, or if you're working in that position, or if you are an HR specialist and you have to use a particular technology that has done some hiring, I want you to think about that, because we've seen some big challenges internationally. We've seen Amazon create an algorithmic tool to do a hiring process, and because it was built on data that used more male resumes, no women were hired. So we saw what was called sexist AI, AI that was biased against gender. We have seen in the healthcare system, AI systems that have been used to track breast cancer and skin cancer, because again, the data sets weren't diverse. They were misdiagnosing Black and brown people. So we're seeing many things. The criminal justice system, I keep saying it, that criminal justice has got to be the conscience of artificial intelligence, because so many of the decisions made are life and liberty decisions, and we've always got to check that. So I want you to always think about ethics, to think about what we call ethical innovation and inclusive innovation, and why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so critical to everything we do moving forward when it comes to technology, the new reality. And this is where we are. And everything that I've told you to where we are now leads to the fact that we have got to reimagine. We have got to reimagine who we are. We have got to reimagine the societies in which we live. Individuals have got to reimagine. Families have got to reimagine. Communities, cities, countries are all reimagining. You have got to reinvent yourself. You've got to reskill, you've got to upskill, you've got to rebrand. You have got to rebrand from an individual level, from an organizational level. You've got to reposition as well, because we're not coming back into the same space. You've got to ensure that you are relevant. And this is what the now speaks to, relevance. And you've got to ensure that you're real time. Nobody is doing old time anymore. Everybody wants real time. So in this new reality, I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do with your old self? You can't have an old self in a new reality. And as we think of the world now, and as I end this presentation, I will say to you, the world will never be the same, and neither can you. And you've got to make some big decisions. You've got to make some quick decisions. And in everything that you do, you have got to think about the people around you. And I think one of the things that we're going to need more moving forward would be that understanding, that empathy, the emotional intelligence, because it really is about sustainability and collaboration and community. And we're going to see that there is a whole new definition to community. And that community is going to be a community that includes technology in a very real way. And I think it's going to take a lot of learning, a lot of growing, and a lot of helping each other. But you've got to be open to the experience. You've got to be honest. You've got to ask those tough questions, and you've got to be willing to do the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. So first of all, I need to apologize to everybody because due to our technical challenges, we did start a little bit late. So I apologize to Renee and I apologize to you all. So in the interest of this, we're just going to have our Q&A. For those who can stay, I know some of you may not be able to stay, and again, we apologize for that. But those of you who can stay, we're going to now address the Q&A, a couple of the questions that were posted. So I'll hand you over to Renee Barnett, who will be facilitating the Q&A session with Renee Cummings.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Andrea. The first question you, Renee, is actually the one that I'd like to go for. Please, can you elaborate on the point have an involvement?
You know what? I can't hear you. It's really distorted. Try the question again. I'm not hearing it. Or if you want to send it to Audra or WhatsApp it or something, I could answer it. But try again.
Okay, let me go again. Please, can you elaborate on the point we all have a digital twin?
Okay, so we all have a digital twin. So everything that you've been doing all your life on the internet is probably stored. You've been using a lot of online banking, a lot of online shopping. You have been using a lot of passwords. All of those things combine to give you a digital identity. So there's someone who can pretty much design you from a digital framework. So what it looks at would be your spending, your loans, your movement, the places that you've gone, the things that you've shopped, all of those things combine to create a digital identity. And that's what we call your digital twin. So you may look one way when you look in the mirror, but when someone does a digital report on you, you look a particular way. So this is why some people may go for a loan and they may have a challenge, or some people may have challenges in other areas. So it's really important to understand or to know what your digital twin looks like. And you can really use search engine optimization tools. If you're into public life, or if you are a leader, or if you are a speaker, you can obviously sometimes Google yourself and you will see where your name props up. And just a quick way to take a look.
Okay, great, thank you. This one is actually a comment, but I will ask if you can just elaborate on it some more, because we have a lot of likes for this one. Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of self-care. This is very essential and should be the new norm going forward. So can you elaborate on this one?
All right, so self-care is very important because self-care is about taking care of yourself. It's about physical care and it is about mental care. You've got to take care of your mind. You've got to protect your mind. You've got to do things to feed your mind, to fertilize your mind, to ensure that the things that are happening in your mind are healthy things. We all have challenges. We all have crises, but you've got to really do things to protect yourself. And it's really about a holistic approach to health. So there is spiritual, there is physical, and there is psychological, and that is critical. And you've got to find that right balance, because if you don't find that balance, you end up draining yourself. And if you drain yourself, or if you are in a position where you're not, there's that lack of equilibrium or that lack of a healthy balance, you will find that your output, your productivity, what you give at home, just what you give on your teams, it really wouldn't be the best that you can give.
Okay, great. Our next question. I think many people are ignoring the impact the lockdown and self-isolation will have on the minds of persons post-COVID-19. For someone who is feeling depressed or down because of working from home, what would you advise them to do?
Well, the first thing I would advise you to do is speak to a professional. Because I am not your psychologist, I don't like to give psychological advice using a medium such as this. But I would say to speak to your HR. If you do have an opportunity to speak to a psychologist, you would want to speak to a psychologist and to share that information. Sometimes we try to share it with friends and family and they don't give us the response we want, or sometimes because they know us, they think that nothing is wrong with us. But you've got to know yourself. And I think we all have a pretty good idea, a pretty solid idea of what we feel like or what we don't feel like or when we are not feeling good. But I would say reach out to a professional because it is very important, because I've been dealing with cases where the isolation has really impacted individuals. As I said to you, from child abuse to child sexual abuse to domestic violence, I've been seeing these cases and treating with these cases. And I really want people to think about it. And even if something is happening in your home and you don't want to talk about it, I will say to you, talk about it, because this pandemic is going to put so much additional pressure on you. I don't think you'd be able to really, negotiate your way out of this successfully without some help.
Okay, great, thank you. The next one, how can we change the thinking of our younger generation when it comes to the new way of learning and e-learning? This is a new way forward for them, and it is critical for them to adjust to the new normal.
Well, I would say it may be the opposite, because I think for a lot of young people, many of them have been born in the time of digital, so they are really much more savvy. I think what we have got to do is really, if it's the challenge that you are seeing, because what I'm saying is where I'm at, you would find that the young people are more tech savvy than us, right? So they are very quick and they understand this space. They are spending time online doing work in TikTok, all the different Instagram things they're doing. But if there's a particular child or you have children who are finding this difficult, it means that you as the parent or you as the caregiver, you've got to really speak to the school and speak to the teacher and have a conversation. And what you want to create would be what we call an individualized educational plan. Because the challenge may not be, or the challenge could be not the digital, but the challenge could be a learning disability or a learning challenge that the child may have when it comes to concentration, or when it comes to multitasking, or when it comes to combining the both. So it may not be the technology itself, but may be that this child, nothing is wrong with the child. The first thing we want to think is something is wrong with the child, but something is wrong with the system. Something is wrong with the approach, and something is wrong with the strategy. So what you want to do is come up with a more creative strategy to make it easy for that child to succeed.
Okay, great. This next one, how do you motivate staff when you are not physically seeing them? Are there techniques that have been proven to be successful?
Well, the first technique is you want to work on your voice, because the first thing we motivate people with is our voice. So this is why I said communication skills are critical. You may want to do some voice training, because voice is important. If someone has a monotone voice, that could make you want to fall asleep, right? If someone has an excited voice, depends on the kind of person you are. If you just woke up and someone is too excited, it turns us off, right? So you have got to learn to really take the temperature in a virtual space. One of the things that you've got to do now is what we do maybe as profilers is you've got to know who you're dealing with. You've got to know your staff or your team members in a different way. You've got to know what makes them click, what doesn't make them click. And what you've also got to know is that you don't always have to run the meeting. There are other members of your team who could run the meeting as well. So it's not always about you. Share the responsibilities and let other members do that. And it's also about being a motivational speaker yourself or being inspired yourself. If you're an uninspired person, technology is not going to make you inspiring, right? So you have got to find ways to work on yourself, to develop yourself, read a little more, pay attention a little more, but do some work, because what this is requiring is that each of us have got to do a little more work, because we weren't ever expecting this in this lifetime.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question here about PTSD. How does a leader assist an employee who is struggling with PTSD while productivity is expected to be maintained?
Well, that calls for empathy. And that calls for just basic understanding that us as human beings, we have challenges, and we all have challenges at different stages of our lives. You've got to ensure that you provide the opportunity in a confidential and safe environment for that employee to access care and to give that employee time. We've got to stop thinking of mental illness as something that is taboo. Many people around us deal with mental illness. Mental illness does not mean you're crazy. You know, and we sometimes think that because people are dealing with a mental challenge that they are somehow insane. No, it's not. We all have to deal with them. Some of us have a greater challenge dealing with it. So it's about you understanding from a leadership perspective that you have got to ensure in a confidential and safe environment that you let this individual know what is available at the organizational level and let them know that the organization is willing to support them during that time, and also knowing that you must be doing some sort of succession planning on your teams to know that somebody else can fill that role during that time.
Okay, here's our next one. How do we start to change our educational systems to include not only e-learning, but also the softer social skills, health and wellness, so that our children learn about their identity and their place in a global space? How do we foster diverse intelligence, emotional intelligence, collective intelligence, and augmented intelligence in our educational system?
That sounds familiar. Okay, how do we do that? So I think we do that oftentimes by choosing or ensuring that we participate in the decision-making of our country, wherever that country is. So that often begins with the way in which we vote, and understanding that our vote is very powerful, and ensuring when leaders present themselves to us that they have a strategy. So if your education strategy is the same strategy it has been for the last 50 years, then you can't expect that. The other thing that you've got to do is that you have got to have a relationship with the schools that your children are in. And you have got to make that request. And you have got to play a particular role from the level of the Parents Association to ensure that teachers and to ensure the education of your child is providing that. I think many times parents may not be as involved as we need to, but we can be, and we can ask, and we can ask those questions. And I think we've got to come together as a collective, not in a abrasive or aggressive way, but in a way that speaks to the development of our children. So we have got to make demands. And I think oftentimes we don't make demands. And I think our teachers, the ways in which many of our teachers are trained, there is still that power relationship where there is authority and then there is a child. But children have rights. And I think as the world grows and as we're growing more and more because of digital technology, because we're going to be seeing that whole augmented and collective approach to intelligence, I think we're going to see a change. But I've worked in the education system in the US. I have worked with children. I have worked with children with disabilities. And this is why I'm saying is that we have got to make it collective action, and we've really got to make demands. So wherever in the world you live, you must have a congressperson, an MP, a minister of education. Sometimes they have town halls and meetings. You've got to turn up. You can't sit home and expect it to happen. I always say that what we've got to do is turn our outrage into action.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more. How do we help our older generational customers navigate the new normal? Some older persons feel out of their depths with no knowledge of electronic banking and email. When we keep ourselves relevant with the technology, how can we help our customers be able to continue seamless business with us in this new environment?
Well, I think what happens is this. What we're seeing is that many of our loved citizens still want that in-house experience. So I think you can offer them the option of someone who does the shopping for them, and many companies are already doing that. There is also the ability to email the things that you want, and you do that level of pickup. And what I have been seeing as well are many organizations that are offering sort of beginner training for many of the elderly. But I will say this to you, I think what we are seeing across the world is that anyone who has a grandchild knows how to use WhatsApp, knows how to use FaceTime, because every grandparent is on the phone with their grandbabies and their grandchildren and family members across the world. So I think we oftentimes do a little ageism discrimination, thinking that elderly senior citizens are loved family members may not be that savvy, but a lot of them are very savvy. And given that I've been seeing that many of these dating websites have age groups for 60 and 70 and all sorts of ages that people are finding love again, I think they would find their way. But it's about, again, letting people know there's always the option, letting people know that you understand their situation, and letting people know if they need help, that you are there to help.
All right, great. Renee, Cummings, I can only say thank you, thank you, thank you. I know, like me, many of you probably feel that you can listen to Renee for the rest of the day, so brilliant, and really so timely in terms of the topic. So on behalf of the MLI Institute, we want to once again thank Renee Cummings for being here with us and sharing with our Massy family. I want to thank you, our participants, again, even for holding on past the time, and apologies again for our technical difficulties at the beginning. But Renee certainly pulled us out with regards to her brilliant presentation. And finally, I want to thank the MLI team with whom we cannot do this production. So we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar Wednesday. And again, we want to encourage you that as you face this new reality, to continue to level up with the Massy Learning Institute. Stay tuned for the announcement of our next webinar. Bye, everybody. Take care.